Well, one of the things we've got for you right now is we've got Steve Burke, who is here from CRN.com, and he has done an incredible investigative report, very revealing, something that Romney fans will enjoy. Obama fans may not be so hot on it. Why don't you tee this one up, Fritz?
Yeah, so CRN on its exclusive iPad app, CRN Tech News app, which you can get in the iTunes store, did a piece a couple of weeks ago talking about where some of this stimulus money went for the technology companies. This is some of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act money, and also what the impact was of that was in terms of jobs, and what some of the lobbying efforts of these companies were and how that may have impacted it. I want to show a couple of quotes from that piece that I think kind of capture a bit of the essence of the reporting. So the first one is, the top 5 technology beneficiaries of the funding profiled by CRN received over $745 million in recovery awards and slashed their U.S. workforces collectively by an estimated 50,000 employees over the last 4 years. Here's another quote that I think captures the essence of this report from CRN. As for the job creation from the Recovery Act, CRN found that a review of the select $122 million in prime recipient funds received by the top 5 companies resulted in a grand total of 709 jobs, according to recovery.org. That amounts to a cost of about $172,489 per job. So I want to thank Steve Burke from CRN. He's the editor of news there, and he's joining us now. Steve, was this what you expected to find when you set out on this journey?
Well, one of the sources that we looked at before we started out on the journey was Pete Schweitzer's landmark book, Throw Them All Out. He's a fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution, and he did a lot of research here and found some of this waste. But even given Peter's investigative work here, we were really surprised at how this money was spent and how few jobs were created from the funds, and what a frenzy it was to spend this money. And I think if people look at this as they would their own personal pocketbook, sometimes if you get a windfall, you tend to spend foolishly, right? I think that's what happened here. This money was not well spent by these companies, and it was a frenzy by these companies to get close to the government with their with aggressive lobbying to get the money and put it anywhere they could. This wasn't money well spent.
Well, let's take a look at some of these companies. One of the first ones I think we'll look at here, Steve, is IBM. Do you want to walk us through some of the data on IBM?
Well, some of the data on IBM. IBM got $180 million in American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funds. They spent $19 million on lobbying. Former IBM CEO Sam Palmisano was at the forefront of the effort to get the government to fund broadband initiatives and to fund stimulus. And clearly, what IBM did was a lot of this money was spent on buying IBM equipment, what you'd expect, hardware and software and services. But my favorite in terms of in terms of the IBM windfall was $45 million that was spent on digital TV coupon upgrades. IBM managing that program. IBM had gotten that contract years before, but when the stimulus came up, hey look, here's an opportunity to go in and extend that contract, and let's use the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act money.
Steve, not all of our readers are familiar with the terms of the stimulus funds. Is that money that IBM gets to keep and spend any way it wants, or does IBM have to give that money back?
No, that's money that IBM was awarded under government contracts. You know, various departments in the government, you know, use that money to buy a lot of IBM hardware, software, and services. So when I think of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the #1 goal of the act was to put Americans to work. And that wasn't done here. A lot of it was used for IT, hardware, software, and services. You know, when we talk to our readership, the entrepreneurs that are small, medium businesses that are out there, you know, building solutions for the small businesses that create the majority of the jobs out there, they tell us this was money not well spent too. They didn't see any of this money. They would have rather have seen tax credits that would give companies that hired employees a tax break. That would have been money. Those tax credits would have done a better job at creating jobs than throwing this money out there in a frenzy.
Why don't we go through a couple others? I think we have a slide here on Honeywell, which is the second company we want to talk about. How much money did they get?
$238 million, Fritz, and they cut their workforce from 58,000 in the U.S. to 53,000. They spent $24 million lobbying. Honeywell CEO David Cote was at the White House on the White House visitors log 21 times, including a Super Bowl party. So when people out there look at how these funds are spent, to say that politics don't play a role in it is simply naive. IBM was a big lobbyist too, and Palmisano, although he's a self-professed Republican, was right there in the trenches advising the Obama administration on how to spend the money, right, to get a piece of that pie.
We have another slide on General Electric as well. What's the tally there?
General Electric, $241 million. They cut their U.S. workforce from 152,000 employees to 131,000 employees, right? And remember, Jeffrey Immelt, who's the CEO of General Electric, was the head of President Obama's Jobs Council. So think about that. These are guys that have a seat at the government table, too. The technology industry is very close to the Obama administration.
One question I have is it sounds like the lobbying efforts paid off for these companies, but in my eye, I'm thinking, wait a minute, come on. Does IBM or Honeywell or GE really need this money? They managed themselves quite well through what some people would call the nuclear winter, but somehow they still managed to get more money. Banks, they were in trouble. They needed the stimulus funding. But did these companies actually need this funding?
No, they didn't need this money. This was a frenzy. Remember, let's put ourselves back to late 2008, 2009. These companies were laying off thousands of employees at a time, so that was definitely going on. But they viewed this as a chance to go in and grab government dollars. Now remember, these companies do a lot of lobbying, separately from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. But when this money was announced, $840 billion up for grabs, right? The lobbying forces behind these companies went into full force, head on. Look, let's grab the cash and run. That's what they did,
The
and they were
lobbying forces
successful.
would be a revenue generator, huh?
Yeah.
And they definitely are. We're going to talk about, I think, some of the Google windfall here. But you look at Google as an example, right? Google's lobbying effort has gone from $5 million in 2008 to more than $10 million today, right?
Did
A
they
lot
get
of money
stimulus
being
funds?
spent by these companies.
So we're showing a slide now, Steve, with the Google-backed clean energy ventures that received reinvestment funds. So Alto Rock, Solar City, Makani Power. These were companies that are backed by Google venture money.
Absolutely. These are companies backed by Google venture money and companies that received American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funds. And remember, Eric Schmidt and the Google team, Google had an energy czar. They had Eric Schmidt at the White House, and even the Google energy czar at the White House, right in the trenches. Google has spent some $950 million on renewable energy investments. This is a huge investment on Google's part. Remember what these guys have, right? How much their energy costs are. This is a huge initiative for them. And, if you look at it, I guess I'd like to look at it. One of the data points we have here, Fritz, is the net worth of these guys during this economic crisis, right?
So we're talking about Larry Page and Sergey Brin at this point.
Absolutely, the Google co-founders. So these guys started 2008 net worth, according to the Forbes 400, $15.8 billion. They ended in 2012, 20.3 billion. So these guys did really well. You know, as Peter Schweitzer said from the Stanford Hoover Institution, if these guys want to go out, they've done very well. They're really bright, intelligent entrepreneurs. They've done a great job with Google. Hats off to these guys. But if they want to go out and make risky bets on renewable energy investments, that should come out of their pocket, not American taxpayers' pockets.
Well, one of the questions I have for you, Steve, is that, you know, the Recovery and Reinvestment Act did generate, according to some data, over 3 million jobs. Are you saying that the technology sector in particular failed? And if so, why do you think that might be?
I think they did fail, and I think there was a faulty premise here in giving the funds, especially to the IBMs, the General Electrics, and the Honeywells of the world, because again, a lot of that money was spent on software, services, and hardware. Now, if you look at the Google investments and the venture capital investments, certainly those companies have done a better job creating jobs, right? These are startups. But this is venture capital. These are risky bets. And as we saw with Solyndra, right? Sometimes they aren't successful. So this is the government going in and picking winners and losers. And it's not the role of government. If you look at technology historically, and you look at the internet era, and you look at the PC era, these companies were started with venture capital without this kind of government backing. So it represents a dramatic shift. And if you look at the venture capitalists, the John Doers of the world, they've gone in and made an aggressive lobbying effort to get the government to fund this new era of clean energy investments. And it's interesting. I guess to me, I'd rather see, the Doers of the world, the Kleiner Perkins and people like that, investing more in the iPad minis and the Apple venture fund they set up. It's kind of interesting because if you look at Kleiner in particular, they started the Obama administration going great guns with renewable energy, and then when they saw the iPhone and the iPad take off, they reversed course and put more money into the Apple fund, which has been very successful.
Steve, is it possible that these companies that are getting this money and still laying off a lot of people could argue that maybe they would have laid off more people had it not been for the stimulus funds?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely true. I think if you looked at the state and local governments that got the funding, they'd say the same thing. But eventually that money ran out, and those people were laid off. Whether it's state and local governments, eventually you have to deal with the real issue is, right? Revenue generation and putting people to work. I just don't think it was money well spent, and our research holds that up. I mean, this is just one slice, a small slice of the money that was spent. Remember, we're talking about $840 billion, but when you talk to, economists, they say the same thing, just not a good return on investment.
Okay, well, that certainly is going to put a lot of heat on the current administration as more details about this are revealed. What do you think of that? Has there been, as a result of the book and as a result of your reporting, has there been any response in any sector that would be affected by the truth that's coming out here?
David, nothing but crickets. It's just business as usual. And I think this is, Peter Schweitzer has been on this for some time, but I think if you look at this is just business as usual in Washington. And I think the challenge for a Romney administration, which if Governor Romney is elected president, is going to be, will we see the same thing with the financial services industry, which is very close to Governor Romney? Some of the biggest backers of the president are Microsoft and Google employees. If you look at where the fundraising windfall the administration has had here, so I don't think it's a Republican or a Democratic issue. I think we need some fundamental reform here, and I think we need these companies to do more defensive lobbying rather than offensive lobbying. More money going into lobbying and winning those government dollars than going into research and development right now. That's a big problem.
Hey, Steve, one of the things that you point out in your report is that much of the money went towards green energy initiatives and things like that. With so much of that part of the market taking a long time to emerge, is it possible that some of these stimulus funds may take some time to actually result in jobs? Or were there some strings attached that said that these jobs had to come right away?
First, you get on. There were no strings attached to them, and I think it remains to be seen just how successful the president's green energy agenda is. This may, 20 years, 10 years from now, we may see this was the best bet that America made. My own opinion from looking at this is that the government is in here picking winners and losers, and that we'd be a lot better off if people are using their own money, venture capitalists and investors looking for big returns, because they have more skin in the game. I think we'd see a more successful effort if these guys were left to their own devices.
Well, Steve Burke, we want to thank you very much for joining us and bringing this report to our attention. Great investigative job. For those of you who just heard that and want to find out more, you can go and find CRN's iPad application in the iTunes store. That is exclusively where the details of this investigation have been presented.